Hello and good afternoon to everybody, or good morning, or good night, good evening, depending on where you're dialing in from in these days of virtual events. It's another teissTalk. It's 4 p.m. On Tuesday with me, Jeff White, your host. Apologies to those of you who are expecting Jenny Radcliffe, who's my usual co-host, who hosts the Tuesday 4 p.m. slots. We've done a swapsy this week, myself and Jenny, so I'm going to be doing today's one, and in a radical shake-up of events, Thursday's one is going to be our guest host, Renee Millman, who's going to be hosting the teissTalk at 4 p.m. So if you're tuning in at 4 p.m, do make Renee welcome. They're going to be discussing leading remote incident response and crisis simulation. Really important topic. So hello, welcome to our regulars. Welcome back. I see some of you are already in the chat saying hello. It's good to see you all. And if you're new to us here on Teiss, welcome. Do help spread the word. We're every Tuesday and Thursday at 4 p.m. live. But also we've got all of our talks archived on the Teiss website. So if you want to go back and have a look through them, we've discussed all of the key issues. We've discussed supply chain, we've discussed diversity, ransomware, AI and cybersecurity. It is all there with our top panelists. And as ever on our teissTalk session, we have a teissTalk mug to give away. One in better condition than this, by the way. Apparently there's new mugs coming. I keep being told that each week, but no so far. So we're going to give a free teissTalk mug away to our attendees today. Today's challenge is, you may know, you may or may not know, you probably do know, I wrote a book. Here it is, crime.com. I don't always keep a copy of my own book on my desk. The reason I kept a copy of the book on my desk today, though, was somebody did a review and they were a little critical of some things that they said I got wrong in the book, which I didn't. I'm not going to make a fuss about it. I haven't gone to Twitter, but I was thinking, hang on, I'm pretty sure I didn't say that. And no, it turns out I did not say the thing they said I said. Anyway, look, the reason I've drawn attention to this is obviously a subliminal attempt to boost my sales, but also I'm going to give away a free book, a free mug. The book has been translated. It's going to be translated into 2 languages. And I want you to guess which 2 languages it is, right? So give it a go. If you get both the languages right, you're instant mug winner. If one of you gets one of the languages right, that could be like the runner-up, and we'll give the mug to that person. So guess which languages the book's going to be translated into, and I may give you some hints as we go along. But look, let's get to the task in hand. We're going to be discussing on today's show, how do you know if your SOC, your Secure Operations Center, is relevant? You might have one in your organization, you might have a virtual one, but how do you know whether it's relevant? Because that's the key thing. What's the point if it's not? We've got a great panel of people to be talking to us today. We're going to be welcoming from the US, Sajid Nassim, who's Chief Information Security Officer at the New Jersey court, as in the courts that sentence people, etc. We've also got Steve Moore, who's Vice President and Chief Security Strategist at Exabeam, friend of the show, he's been on before. But I want to welcome our first guest to talk to us now, Stefan Trelaw, who's Chief Information Security Officer at IG Group. Stefan, how are you doing?
I'm good. Good afternoon, Jeff.
Good. Thanks for that. Oh, by the way, we've had a couple of guesses on the languages, German and Mandarin, binary and German, Spanish and German. German isn't one of them, I'm going to say that. So none of those guesses have got it so far. But there we go. Let's get to the topics in hand. And Stefan, how's firstly, actually, with IG Group, we should probably talk about that because it may not be familiar to some. What does the group do? How big is it?
Yeah, IG Group, so it's about 2,000 people. It's in 17 countries worldwide. We're a fintech. Started off with CFDs and binaries, and we're growing, widening our portfolio. It's a great company to work for. I mean, I've been doing information security for nearly 28 years now, so showing my age a bit. But I think really working within a fintech is really stretching my limits. It's helping my development because it's not, I love information security. It's something I've always been passionate about, but I'm still interested about how different sectors see it as cybersecurity, whereas I'm more interested in the information security umbrella, trying to grow all the little bits that make up that umbrella, and I get to do it all within the financial services industry.
Yeah, interesting. Just so we're clear as well, IG Group. So I imagine you're developing sort of applications and software and so on that allows people to manage the money. Have I understood that correctly? Is that sort of how that works?
Well, we offer services to our clients, and there are some products where there are open applications out there where they can integrate with some of those services. Effectively, in the majority, it's over-the-counter type products within the trading services. So I think it's there are a few companies like us. I think what's maybe different is we do really focus. We do, more than half of our organization are technologists. And for me, in my role as a CISO, I mean, it's a great challenge. It's great working with smart people, but those smart people also keep my brain ticking over. I think it's some of their challenges to bring up new challenges I've got to try and solve. So every day is different, but it's interesting.
Also, that's interesting. If you're working with a company, because a lot of the speakers we have on teissTalk are working with companies where, frankly, the rank and file employees are not techies. It could be a bookstore or something like that. The people you're working with, a lot of them are going to be techies. Is that a harder challenge? Do they often feel like they know security, or they should know more, or they know more about it than? Do you see what I mean? You have to kind of.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I've worked in all sectors over the years, and what I found are different sectors, as I said, have a different view. There are some sectors where information security might be technologists trying to do a bit of everything, multi-hatted roles. Whereas definitely within the financial sector, you need specific roles. And I think the art of it is really trying to identify those who have strong views and try and help them become advocates. So bring them on board. So those, I do listen to them. I think definitely within the developer community, they are, my experience. There's these are the types of people that quite often are the either the hackers, the white hats, that we deal with. So I'm quite interested in understanding their views, where their ethics lie, what they consider good, what they consider bad. I mean, what I can absolutely count on is they're definitely going to tell me what they think, which is great. But because I think historically it's a challenge where people don't want to talk about it. Maybe I'm a role that people don't want to come and talk to. But I think that's definitely something we've changed around, and it's not an issue for me now.
Yeah, interesting. Oh, one last thing on IG Group as well. So I've understood this correctly. Do you, in terms of your customers and your clients, do you hold their money, or is their money held elsewhere and you're helping them interact with it?
Yeah, so we have to, we hold client money. We have to, but it's managed at arm's length. Obviously, there's a lot of regulation about how we manage that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing I was going to ask. 'Cause obviously, that feeds into the regulation piece, and I'm sure we'll come on to that in terms of stocks and how they work. But I want to talk first about some news this week, some cybersecurity news in terms of, this is more on the sort of third party side. News this week that there's been more research by Microsoft, bless their cotton socks, into Russian SVR, fancy bear behavior. Actually, SVR's cozy bear, I believe, and their attacks on supply chains. So this was reported in, which one was this? Bleeping Computer. Oh yes, Bleeping Computer, a stout publication. Others are available. But this is basically exposing the fact that it goes way beyond SolarWinds. Stefan, I imagine this probably wasn't a surprise to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think when I looked at this, I think three things came out straight away. I mean, I think the first thing is just a reminder that these groups are out there and they do have state-sponsored backing. I still find it quite amazing how ethically, how different areas of the world, different countries have different views on how to do this, and these groups are quite open. Okay, I mean, I'm not surprised, but I still find it shocking. if I'm allowed to have those two emotions in one, but and ultimately, they're working to create wider disruption, which obviously, I think the way I look at it, perhaps cynically, is I'm always saying, why are you doing it? What is your government or country or alleged country got to gain out of this? I mean, I think the second point that jumped out was these targets in the majority are larger third parties now, so they're not necessarily always going for the actual individual organization now. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I think in this case, it's an example of where I think it's changing. I think they're now going for bigger third-party organizations that lots of organizations are dependent on, and obviously it causes, if they get it right, it can cause wider disruption down the chain. And I think the third bit is this idea of transparency between the organizations and actually the service providers that are effective in the organizations that are using them. And I think this is where I was going to really take it, because I think within the financial sector there's a lot of scrutiny on vendor management and procurement, especially around third parties. So I think for the people on listening in, it's no surprise we need to do diligence on our third parties, and it's also no surprise that if I say you're as strong as your weakest link, these are things that we've come to know and love over the last few years. However, I think definitely where I've felt the pain is ultimately if I'm engaging a third party, if I'm the controller of the data,
Yeah.
and I'm trusting a third party and I've done my diligence, I do expect some transparent comms in return. What I've noticed in this case as well, that definitely will, with one of the vendors involved, is whilst they're trying to figure out what's happened, ultimately I'm still liable for reporting a breach if it did affect me.
Mm,
Trying to get
mm.
that relevant update is not there.
Yeah.
Um, and it's I find that quite an awkward thing. I mean, another example is
Sorry to
sorry,
interrupt.
sorry, Jeff. Hmm?
Sorry to interrupt, Stefan. When you say that that isn't there, so are you saying that if organisations find out they've been breached, or suppliers find out they've been breached, that they're not telling you, they're not updating you, or what are you not getting at?
I think what you tend to see are quite generic updates, which I'd expect. I think as with our own organisation, if we have a crisis management plan, you obviously I understand absolutely my role. You could be careful about understanding the situation and very very careful about how you communicate, what you communicate, when you communicate.
Mm,
There is we've all got to be careful about that. But I think the balance I'm seeing here more and more, especially when when the bad guys are targeting big third parties, are we're all in the same pot here.
mm,
I'm also I'm saying, well, I've potentially got in the 72 hours to report a
yeah,
potential breach to the ICO because I'm based in the UK here, for
yeah,
example. But actually, when I've not got a lot, I feel not comfortable to say anything, and
mm,
potentially I know I might be affected. And
yeah,
then in this particular, or in some cases like this, and similar examples, I'm knocking on their door saying, well, can I have a bit more?
mm,
And
mm,
it's even very hard to get through. So I think a key message I would actually pose potentially to the regulators here is, as I would in an organization, when things are really bad, we have an incident management team.
mm,
Actually, within the financial sector, could we not have a similar situation where if it was a major third party that's
yeah, yeah.
hit and affecting lots of organizations, could we not have like a bystander acting as that interface and doing the communications on their behalf?
Because I was going to say about that, I feel your pain, but if you are a big supplier who's been hit and all of your customers are phoning you up, it's that thing where
Absolutely.
you're having like 50 phone calls where you're effectively trying to give the same information out. So it's an interesting one. Just on the, by the way, on the book translation, I will say that the two languages have been mentioned in the chat. So if you combine the various answers there, eventually one of you will get it. And no, it's not, Benjamin, it's not Icelandic. It's not being translated into Icelandic. Oh, by the way, guys, you might have seen one of our guests, Sajid, there in the dressing back script. You've had a little glimpse backstage of one of our guests who popped up there briefly on screen. We'll be getting to them very soon. But Stefan, should we? It's really interesting. I mean, the third party stuff is really interesting, and have a look at that story about the SVR. What's really interesting for me, from a journalist point of view, is the SVR, so the Russian foreign intelligence hackers known as Cozy Bear, tended not to get caught. So for me, one of the really interesting things about this is the fact so much their infrastructure is being exposed now, and they seem to be being, as clumsy as some of their bear colleagues in Russia, if indeed we believe the attribution. But Stefan, let's talk about this, the SOC, the Secure Operations Center. I mean, I don't know how much you can say about IG Group, but do you have one internally? Is it outsourced? What's your setup?
Yeah. So yeah, we have we have an internal SOC. I mean, I think again, I've sat in different sectors, and I think the view of what's good, maybe that's a question again we all ask. What's good enough is quite difficult. It has been
Mm,
difficult within the cyber world. I started off my background started off in the security service type background. So I was, a mentor of long ago once said, at the end of the day, it's not about the technology, it's about getting good data and getting good people to correlate it and be able to spot the bad things happening.
mm,
And I think in the back of my mind, that's always been my mantra. So when I think of a SOC, I think, what's the capability of your organization? What's separate professional security teams? So I'm thinking the AppSec, the access management, the identity
mm,
access management, the risk teams. These are teams that might not exist in some organizations. And once you've got that right, I think the security operation, who I see as the day-to-day spotting the bad things, spotting those anomalies, and then reporting the initial point of escalation,
mm,
that's when you can figure out how big you need it. I mean, at the end of the day, I think my view is, I've had experience with both external and internal SOCs. I personally still prefer internal SOCs only because I still believe that if you can get the education and understanding right, they're always going to provide a more maximum benefit because when things happen, they've got more context around it. And I guess the last thing I'd say to your question as well is, of course, you can scale a SOC as well. I mean, it's not just about pretty monitors on a wall. You do need those teams looking at it. But I think it's also about making sure you've got the right skill sets focused on the identification, investigation, escalation. I think in smaller organizations that can be one person, but I think a really good performing SOC, you probably have 2 or 3 layers at least and sort of an escalation through it.
Right. It's interesting, actually. Alan has asked a question which is absolutely on point on this. What would be the practices and organizational prerequisites to have a SOC? So if you're putting a SOC in place, what's the sort of foundations that you need in order to do that?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's really understanding the sector you're in, understanding, and what I mean by that is, are you going to be a target for attack? I mean, it goes maybe as a sideline answer here. It goes back to the transparency you have with a regulator. I think within the financial sector, I've got a really good transparency and communication with our regulator. So it means that if we see activity, I have a method of on a full method sharing it and seeing if this is something that's being more widely seen in the industry. Right. That's really important when you're looking at a SOC, because actually if you think you're going to, if you're in an active ground where it's a typical day to day where you're going to see attacks, definitely you need to start thinking about good monitoring.
Is that foundation. Sorry to interrupt, Stefan. Are you talking there about information coming in? Like if you're going to set up a SOC, you need to work on the flows of information in, for example, from the regulator, or information sharing or whatever.
No, I think it was just sorry. I just I think one of the things I would do is just understand the context of the industry you're in. You're in an industry where nobody really cares, because that sets ultimately straight away your justification for having a SOC, because they're not cheap. I think as in the industry I'm in, it's definitely there. As soon as we connect into services, we know we're a target. So I think so do we need a SOC is not a it's not a problem for me. I think then it's about understanding size and scale. Is it 24/7? Are you going to have the money and the resources to build something on premise, or actually do you only have an option of going out? So I think these are questions that we have gone through when we've been growing our security operations center. But again, I think a key point I'll go back to is, once you've answered all these questions, context, just a personal view, but context for me is huge. I mean, I've worked with both external and internal. I think when I've worked with external, there's always been a time where it's just lacked the context, and maybe they could have done something a bit quicker. Right, whereas I've never really had that issue when I've got them within my direct control.
Because they're a bit closer to the knitting, as it were. It's actually good. Should we do a poll? I wonder if our teissTalk, who beavers away willfully, manfully in the background, sorting everything out for us. I wonder if we could do a poll for our teissTalk. Money no object. Would you prefer internal or external SOC? And I know the answer is it depends, and I know money isn't always an object. I know, but let's just throw that out there and see what people say. By the way, on the languages, good thought from Danny. I take it that's Hebrew. I'm going to guess at that, but still nobody's actually come up with the winning combinations. As I say, the two are in there. You just have to combine them and eventually get there. Otherwise, I might just give it away to somebody who got close. So yes, in our poll, you can see the poll tab at the top, and you can vote on whether you prefer internal or external as your SOC. And as I say, I know it's a sort of a straw man of an argument, but I'm going to bring in our other panelists, because we've got another question actually from Danny. So folks, let's bring in our other, sorry, I always get carried away with this and forget, but we've got other panelists, of course. Sajid Nassim, who's Chief Information Security Officer at New Jersey Courts, and Stephen Moore, who's Vice President and Chief Security Strategist at Exabeam. Hello to both of you who are joining us from wherever they're joining us, presumably New Jersey for one of them. In terms of the internal, internal is pitching ahead at the moment. External falling behind a little bit. Sajid, hello. Good morning. I take it to you. How are you?
Good morning. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Good. Really good to have you on. And for folks who, I mean, I hope all of our viewers know where New Jersey is, Sajid, but the New Jersey court system, I mean, how big are we talking here?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Jeff. So New Jersey is obviously just across the river from New York. So in terms of the court system, it's quite a large organization here. We're talking about 13 to 14,000 employees for the court. In addition to that, our footprint, I mean, the way that the courts work is they are, it's a judiciary branch, so it's a branch of government. And so our user base is essentially about 30 to 40,000 police officers and about 125,000 basically lawyers who are running law firms. So in terms of our employees, and then we also have some federal government users. So I mean, the user base is like 200,000 plus, and there's quite a lot of activity going on in terms of the coordination for the state.
Yeah, interesting. So, G, can I stay with you on that? I know there's been a project in the UK to digitise all of our court material, because if you go into courts, particularly criminal courts in the UK, which occasionally I do, there are these binders that they give every jury member, and several binders often, and there's an attempt to try and digitise all that information, which obviously informationally is a challenge, but security-wise, a huge challenge. For the New Jersey courts, is everything digitized? It's still on paper? Where do you sit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I appreciate it. It's the fundamentals of what it is. The New Jersey courts actually started to digitize records many decades ago. They've actually always used computers to a certain extent, but I think the front-facing, if you actually walked into a court system, you would have had people with files and all this other stuff, which still to a certain extent is there. Largely because lawyers like to work off of their paperwork, but the behind the scenes in terms of filing the paperworks, and we have something called e-courts. Bottom line, you go to a website, you file, a child custody matter, tax matter, criminal matter, or civil matter. All of those things are there. We've also opened up the court system from a filing matter electronically to about 7.5 million New Jersey residents. So pro se, right? People who are doing it on their own.
Right. Interesting. Really interesting. So, G, thank you for that. Stephen, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. I actually had right before I was going on, my internet briefly went out. So I'm very glad to be here digitally. So I'm glad I can return.
These things happen. It's the curse of our modern age. But Stephen, quickly tell us about Exabeam very quickly for those of us who haven't heard.
Yeah, so I may have missed my own introduction. Apologies. I'm Steve Moore, Chief Security Strategist at Exabeam. We're a leader in the SIM and XDR space. I came to know Exabeam actually as a customer and then an advisor, looking to solve problems actually after having a very big breach. Said very plainly, we're focused on helping the defender build capital that will help them in defense and the eradication of adversaries. So one of the things I learned paying outside consultants, for building of timelines for breach reporting, and that's one of the things we do is we build timelines. So I wanted to buy that and be able to reuse it, and that's ultimately what that sole use case, on top of machine learning and a bunch of other great things that we do, looking at lateral movement, which credential theft, which you talked a bit with our Russian group mentioned earlier. So having capabilities that are adversary aligned, which you'll hear me talk a lot about, but we're primarily in the SIM and XDR space.
Interesting. Stephen, can I stay with you on this? Because it's interesting. Our poll, we did a little poll about whether people would, if money was no object, whether they prefer their SOC to be internal or external. And internal has definitely come out ahead. 61% would rather it was internal. What do you make of that?
Well, I'd kind of like to know what the other 39, why they didn't want it internal. I wonder if that's just sort of the not having to trouble with it, right? To not have the stress of building one, because it's a lot of work to create and build, and that's what I spent a lot of my career doing. So before joining Exabeam, I spent all my time working in analytic capabilities, building them, leading them, and acting as an analyst in them prior to that. I think depending on your organization, I want to be very sure on my ability to detect and primarily respond. And so failures will occur. I want to have high degree of assurance that capability is as much inside as it can be. Typically we see a hybrid, right? So it's partially outsourced, partially insourced. Part of it's managed by someone else. But I think that you need this sort of tribal knowledge that exists in response. You have to have owners internal that understand the business processes and the goals of the organization. You can't just throw it all over the wall and see success. Even organizations that offer great services, that even have sort of the R at the end in response, ultimately there's still going to be somebody back in the company that's managing sort of the cleanup and the eradication. And as we mentioned earlier, Stefan mentioned, all of the messaging that when a failure occurs is owned by that CISO or the member of the SOC, where you're having to do client-facing management. So you still sort of ultimately you still own the pain. Do you also own the capability, right? And so there's no one sort of formula, but I would want to own a good majority, but also lean on those that have expertise when needed.
Interesting. Yeah, interesting. I like the phrase tribal knowledge. That goes back, I think, to what Stefan was talking about the fact that people in your organization understand your organization. There's a question coming from Danny, which is an interesting one. Stefan, I wondered if I could come to you with this first. Question is, can you realistically establish a SOC with the authority to make a difference where information security bods have failed? So he says MITRE puts politics and authority at the top of its list. So what's the point of the SOC if there's other areas that aren't doing so well? Does the question make sense to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And as you can tell, I'm unplanned for that particular one. I think my transparent answer is it's never a perfect situation, right? I think just stretching on what Stephen just said, I think I know what information I have to hand. I know the relationships I have with our vendors. It actually goes back to something I firmly believe in. So information security for me is an umbrella across the top, all right? And all the sub bits, of which I would say cyber is one crucial bit. The amount of bits, though, depends on the type of organization you're in. So where I'm at the moment, we have lots of those bits. We have lots of sub departments. And again, I'll use developers. We are spending a lot of time and effort in empowering our developers to be part of that defense mechanism. So whilst they are not what I would say professional security team members, but actually I am looking for them to identify ways that they can be part of that escalation chain. So I guess what I'm saying is my role, is my job to look at the up and the out and try and address those problems. And I said it's not a perfect world, but I've got a decent amount of oversight, whether it's external landscape and in, and that keeps bobbing about. But actually within the SOC, it's not just the SOC. The SOC is informed by an awful lot of teams. So whilst I would say the SOCs are the eyes and ears, but actually they don't spot everything. I mean, we have a SIM. We put a lot of effort into that, and it's constantly being adapted for the organization and for new systems and for changes. But actually I'm equally as informed by the developers or by the identity access management or by the HR. And I think that takes a lot of work, and it's never a done journey. But I think what I'm finding is, as I go along that journey, the more effort I put in, it does help at some point in the way it comes out.
It's interesting, yeah. By the way, Benjamin has put in a quote in the chat, which is a comment in the chat, which is interesting. He says he voted for an external SOC, and Stephen sort of said, well, why would you do that? He says, for my organization, the benefit of outsourcing the SOC function, the scale of their other clients reduces the risk of me and my SOC missing something, which is an interesting point. So, G, can I come to you as well on this? I mean, we should have addressed this in your situation. Is all of your SOC stuff internal? Do you have some external? What's your setup?
Yeah, so our stuff is internal, but however, I'm going to say something important here. I think from my standpoint, we are not in a world right now where we can't afford to not share information with each other, right? So even if my SOC is external, there are partners that we're working with. Essentially, they're like, to me, almost like a extension of the SOC to a certain extent, to get information. For example, we do some work with anomalous network behavior because we're dealing with governments and all that. That essentially, there's aspects of the SOC that are with the vendor. And what we do is do significant work around contracts, around what they're doing, how they're connecting to us, how they're dealing with it. Because, especially after we saw the SolarWinds breach and all this other stuff, we're just not in that world where you just give some one thing away or forget about it. We're in a world where you got to pay attention, right? So the contracts matter. We look at encryption in specific ways. We try to make sure that our government data is protected, as best as we can.
Yeah, it's interesting. Just looking at the chat, and I've managed to simultaneously do two things in the chat. I've got people commenting about different languages the book might be translated into. Ali said trial and error would lead to German and French. Sorry, it's neither German nor French, so I don't know where that could. But also we've got chat obviously going on about socks. And actually, interestingly, Sajid, to your point, Danny said here, Nirvana would be, and Nirvana is a network of socks all sharing, which internal socks hate to save embarrassment. Threats are shared. It's a shame intelligence isn't, except for some notable monolithic relationships. So it's interesting. Let's talk about, because I'm aware we haven't really talked about the kind of relevance issue. And Stephen, I was thinking about that, because talking about the relevance of a sock, it's like relevant to whom? To the person who's running the sock, it might be one thing. But if you're trying to report to somebody else, whose relevance do you think is the most important one for a sock?
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways you could cut this. When I say relevance, or when I think about relevance, the first is measuring against adversary alignment, so adversary capabilities. So relevance is, what's the adversary that, as it applies to your corporation, what are they likely to do? How do they achieve success? And what's your ability to understand, detect, manage, respond, eradicate? And so if you know that there's a certain level of a problem that you're likely to be faced, if you're not going through that exercise, you will very likely fail. And if your organization isn't responding, you mentioned something earlier, it's often harder to get cooperation. You talk about that MITRE pyramid. Cooperation is often much harder to get than $1 million in our field, right? And so that's, if there's an issue at the top, you have to then try to build great capabilities and then measure the adoption of that great capability. So build what you think is the best, and then hold everyone else accountable to the adoption of that. But my other 2 points I'll make on relevance. So first, adversary capability and your alignment to it. So are you adversary aligned? The next is, what's your ability, based on incidents you've observed and managed and cleaned up, the lessons learned out of that? What's your ability to enact influence on the organization, back into the organization as sort of an OODA loop, both near term and more proximal? So I need to make a change in my environment right now to return myself to a known good state, plus a tweak to keep the adversary out. Can I do that? What's my ability to do that at scale? Also, what's the thing that might take $1 million in a year and cooperation? I know I've got a gap based on observations through incidents. So that's the second piece. And the third, to me, is a little higher level, is what stories do you tell out of your SOC? What's your ability to tell stories via images, pictures, or true storytelling, including incident sharing, right? Intel sharing. And who do you tell that story to, right? So I'm beginning to frame out kind of a storyboard here. If I'm going to go in and interview an organization about the efficacy of their SOC, I want to talk to the executive over those 3 areas, and then everything else kind of trickles down from there.
Yeah, interesting. Stefan, can I come to you on that? Does what Stephen said there ring bells with you, or do you think among the things he described, those 3 things he described, there's one that for you is actually, really at the front?
No, I mean, 100% agree. I mean, I've got a great example of that. So again, I've been in the financial sector now 7 years, and if we go beyond 2 years ago, if our SOC had seen an incident, I think there's still a view within the financial industry. I want to keep things close to heart. It might be affecting the other industry, but I can't speak to anybody. Whereas, I now attend a quarterly meeting that's chaired by a regulator, and you have peers at that. We have the NCSC there, we have the Bank of England there, and it's great because the whole idea is they have a Chatham House forum where we can talk and share. And actually what the regulator's now doing, they've been running it for probably about 18 months, is an ability to escalate. Now, it's not something to be abused, but actually our SOC now has a method of engaging into them. And actually it allows us to start having a conversation via that interface with other peers. There was something that happened last year where we saw it. It wasn't impacting us, but we saw it. We reported it. And actually, within the next 24 hours, we found out that North America, that Singapore were all getting hit with the same thing.
Right.
And that allowed us as a collective, and I think it's what Sajid was saying. I think at the end of the day, we've got to accept that if something hits, in this case, we were talking about third parties, something hits that, it affects all of us in some way, shape, or form. Now, well, that's the situation we're in, and it's only going to be more like that. So I think we've got to find healthier ways, and maybe it's going to be sector driven, but find better ways where we can, yes, escalate and actually have a chat. And I think the better we do that, the better we can actually gear up for defending ourselves. Because I'm not just defending IG, we're defending our industries, right?
Yeah. Sajid, can I come to you on that? Because it's an interesting point Stephen makes about the idea of a SOC telling a story. Is that something that you look for in terms of the results, how they're being presented, and the data you get? Have you Is that a priority for you?
Yeah, so actually, I heard, yeah, I agree. I mean, I hadn't thought about it that way, so I appreciate the about the storytelling part. But yeah, I mean, look, I mean, we're in the world now where, I mean, you're telling stories by looking at data and trying to explain it in like basic words, you know? I mean, one of the things I've said before is if you looked at the last several breaches, the ones we've seen in New York recently, the New York City Law Department, then why, you know, the bank, and then you also saw SolarWinds, people just leaving users open. I mean, my joke is that you could just hire somebody, call them right-click disable person, right? I mean, so even if you had a little practice where you're just watching the users come in and out of the organization, you know, and making sure that they're closed properly. We did a thing in front of the Supreme Court. It reached our levels at that level, right? Where the Supreme Court hearing it, we said, look, we're a union shop here. It's a big thing. And we're not adversarial. We actually wanted peace without war. Actually, we were looking for that. But we said, look, next month, if your users are left open for 10 days or whatever number you've left them open, we're going to seek discipline from all the unions and we're going to get them on board, right? And the whole idea was compliance. We're not trying to like hurt anybody, but that's the kind of thing. So if the SOC can tell a story as simple as a human comes into your organization, there's a computer user created, it travels through the organization and it leaves the organization, the Supreme Court will even listen and acknowledge it and willing to work on it, right? And these are seasoned professionals and complicated people who are dealing with complex matters.
Right. Yeah. So it's it can help in the right way. It can help present a good picture and a simple picture as well. Yeah, it's interesting. I had a question come from Benjamin in the chat. In the Q&A. SOCs can share information internally and externally. They can cooperate or not. But here's the question, which is interesting. How do you know that what you built in terms of an internal SOC is any good? Which is quite an interesting question. Like, how do you Stephen, have you got any views on that?
Yeah, I think that if you're looking for a tactical answer, one of the things I would argue is, look at MITRE and look at the attack framework. Look at the methods for lateral movement. There's 16 or 17 different sort of methods within that that somebody could use to enact a form of lateral movement. Ask yourself, how many of those can you see at a foundational level? Meaning, whether it's something from the core authenticator or something from PowerShell. What do you collect those logs? What can you see? We know that lateral movement, sort of living off the land, is very common. So does your SOC have the ability to identify lateral movement? Plain and simple. Don't care what you buy. Don't care what, right? Can you see lateral movement or not? Can you see hops? Can you see credential shifts from one to the other? And this is just one of many different, what's your ability to see beaconing? Does your SOC understand the concept, if you want to talk about ransomware, for example, precursor malware? Do you know what precursor malware is? Does your SOC have the ability to identify that, knowing that other more bad things come downstream? So we care about ransomware. All right, we say that, but do we know how to manage it? Do we know the other causes of ransomware? Like things like these initial access brokers that have credentials that they're reselling. Methods of, can you identify credential theft? Things like that. How quickly can you create an artifact that helps in the resolution of an incident or a breach of some kind? How quickly can you ask and answer questions of your environment? So ask your SOC team members, what's the worst part of your job? And then shut up and listen and say, hey, like, how long does it take you to perform these tasks? So those are, I've got higher level points, but I'll stop there. Those are some things I would key on right out of the gate.
Okay. Stefan, anything to add to that? Sounds like quite a sensible way of going at it. Not simple, but sensible way from Stephen there.
Yeah, again, I mean, I agree with everything Stephen said. I mean, we didn't, as they say, Rome wasn't built in a day. I think the phrase is, well, SOCs aren't built in a day either. I mean, I would say it's better to also start off sensibly, understand a point you want to get to, and you can test. There are ways of testing it. I mean, when our SOC was smaller, we used some third parties to help us. I mean, as it's got bigger, you can do capture the flags. You can do this is the idea of purple teaming. If you really want to surprise them, you can do the red teaming. There are, I guess what I'm saying to the audience is there are different levels, but don't do too much too soon. I mean, what's important is you understand your environment. So it's really powerful if you can create a situation, see if you can spot something happening moving across your network. Once you do that, you can figure out where do you want to go next.
Yeah, good stuff. Carrie, by the way, Carrie said in the chat in response to Stephen's taxonomy there, list there, if the answer to all those is broadly speaking yes, does that make us good in your eyes? I suspect Stephen's response would be a start, I guess, Stephen.
Well, it certainly allows you that, hey, we have the ability at the lowest foundation. Do we have the ability to gather the log or the event that allows us to try to have success? And so just because you say yes to that sort of periodic table of attack things doesn't mean you're good. It just means you can see. Right. So it may check that sort of maturity box that you can see it all, but it doesn't yet mean that you have a high degree of efficacy. Efficacy is, maturity is knowing how to read about how to box. You've read all the books on how to box. Efficacy is actually being able to get in the ring and have you developed your lungs and can you take a hit and all the rest, right? So it's yes to the first part, no to the second.
Okay, all right. Sorry, Carrie, maybe not what you were wanting to hear, but it's a good start anyway. So, G, can I just come back to you because I'm interested in this information sharing from SOX. Obviously, you're part of the government network. To what extent can you share? Does all the government stuff get shared at one level and can't really go down into private industry that far, or can you share some of this information?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. I mean, that's right on a key area there, and it can get hairy because governments are trying to be like independent branches of government, right? I mean, that's their thing. That has changed digitally because now that's one thing to talk about legally and those borders. So you have the legislature that is creating the laws, you have the police department that are enforcing the laws, and then you have the court systems that are essentially adjudicating, right? And depending on where you go, I mean, New Jersey, there could be towns where people don't even understand that. They think they're just walking into a jail basically everywhere they think, right? I mean, so you have different things going on. So, and even you're going to have staff that don't understand their basic civics and don't understand, what's sharing, what's not sharing. So sometimes they think no sharing at all, right? But again, we can't live in that world. You have to understand this through the right lens here. So with that backdrop, as an example, in New Jersey, our network is connected to the police departments of New Jersey. We know for a fact specific ransomwares have hit New Jersey law enforcement. We saw Blue Leaks, I believe it's called Blue Leaks from a summer or so back, which revealed the identities of and misbehavior, let's say, of 700,000 cops across the United States in different places. Okay. And that was at the same time as the Black Lives Matter movement. So you have all of these clashes and things that are going on. I believe that was done by the hacking group Anonymous, right? All of these things are going on. So we know for a fact that our law enforcement partners are under attack. We know that for a fact. How do we know that? We're on the same network. We see it, right? Time to time, we will see things on the law enforcement network about ransomware that we have to pick up and say, dude, you got a problem here. You got to look at it. Even though we're not their direct whatever, right? We're not, the same branch of government. On the flip side, lawyers in the state of New Jersey are sort of accredited by our Supreme Court where I work, right? And so what winds up happening is they're essentially officers of the court. However, they are LLCs or meaning they're companies. They're not, you know what I'm saying? They're not, however, they have to work with us essentially. We have seen law firms get hit with ransomware where we know before they know that they have a ransomware because they have already sent the ransomware to all the law firms and judiciary, and we're seeing more about them. So we have taken a position that if we see things, although we're not in a position to give them any advice, we will let them know that there's something going on. We're shutting you down and you need to look at it. We won't give you any advice. So we definitely share threat intelligence with different partners that are there. And there's even local people that we share information with once we have it.
Interesting. Fascinating stuff. We could talk SOX all day, I'm sure, but we are running up against time. So I want to thank our panelists. It's been a really, really good discussion. There's Stefan Trelaw, who's Chief Information Security Officer at IG Group, Sajid Nassim, who's Chief CISO at New Jersey Courts, and Stephen Moore, who's Vice President and Chief Security Strategist at Exabeam. Their LinkedIn profiles are in the chat, so you can connect with them all on LinkedIn. By the way, nobody actually got the answers to the 2 translation languages. It was, in fact, Russian and basic Chinese basic. But I'm going to give the free mug our teissTalk, who, as I say, does a fantastic job. Thank you, teissTalk, for coordinating all of this stuff. I'm going to ask our teissTalk to give the mug. I liked Simon Yakan's answer, which was translating it to Fortran and basic. That would be the day when that happens. Sadly not. So I don't think my publishers are up to that. But listen, it's been fantastic debate, fantastic conversation, as always, on Teiss. As I say, we will be back on Thursday at 4 p.m. when Renee Millman is going to be talking about leading remote incident response and crisis simulation at 4 p.m. back on this platform. Thanks again to our panelists, Ajid, Stefan and Stephen. Thanks to our Teiss Elf, and we'll see you all again on another teissTalk soon. Cheerio.
Thank you guys. Be safe out there. Bye.